You ever get the feeling you're not being listened to? It's annoying, isn't it? Particularly when you know you're right. But even when it's not important, it's still annoying. Sometimes it's even more annoying because it's not important. Because it's just a detail people, other people, think it's of no consequence. But we know better, don't we? We know that all those little details add up to something that is potentially more important. For instance, I know that the increasing Americanization of our language is important to me. It's one of those things that, as I get older, I find it annoys me more and more. Even though I know that it's not really that important, and it's just a symptom of aging, and that I really shouldn't worry about it. But I can't help it. I know that American English is not our language anymore, and I know that to complain about Americans talking American really is just imperialism on my part. But every time I hear a British person go up to a bar and ask, "Can I get?" rather than "May I have?" it puts my teeth on edge. Likewise, when someone says "on the weekend" rather than "at the weekend," as we always used to, or fighter jet rather than fighter plane, or airplane rather than aeroplane for that matter. Why did it change? When did it change? And who decided? Well, they didn't ask me, that's for sure. The truth is that it happens automatically as languages change, and it isn't always a one-way street, which I suppose is a big part of what irritates me. Our railway stations somehow became train stations when I wasn't paying attention, and the word schedule somehow morphed into schedule. But at least Americans now know what a wanker is. A nicely potent addition to their lexicon. I'm sure you'll agree. But of course this stuff doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And it also doesn't matter that in this regard, as my wife has repeatedly pointed out when I've noisily corrected the speaker on the radio or the television, that no one is listening. But some things do matter. They matter a lot. And some things matter more than anything. And is there anything that matters more than preventing the rape of your children? I would say not. But it seems as if the mainstream media don't agree, since they're quite obviously not listening. So how must it feel when you're a social worker? You know, one of the ones that gives a shit. And you know that young and underage girls are being repeatedly gang raped by adult men. And you tell your superiors, and they do nothing. How must that feel? How must it feel as a mother or a sister or a brother, and you know that this is being done to your loved ones, and you report it, and nothing is done? How would that feel? How must it feel as a father when you discover that this has been done, and is still being done, to your daughter? How must that feel? How must it feel when you find out that you are unable to perform your primary responsibility, that of protecting your daughter? How must it feel when you resist the entirely natural and understandable temptation to cave the perpetrators' heads in with a crowbar, and instead, like the good and civilized citizen that you are, you report it to the police, and even they do nothing? How must it feel when, instead of taking your concerns seriously, you are the one who is arrested? How must that feel? And how must it feel when, as an underage girl, who has just been passed around as a sexual plaything by a group of fully grown men, South Asian Muslim men, it has to be said, and you tell someone, and they don't listen, and they do nothing? How must that feel? I'd wager a bit more than bloody annoying. But most of us, thank God, are not in that position. Although having said that, we had better be on our guard, as there are more of us in that position than we first thought. But for those of us who aren't, we should still be somewhat more than annoyed that the mainstream media, and the BBC in particular, are still not giving this story the coverage it deserves. A quick glance at the BBC News website front page stories on the 8th of April are as follows: Syrian gas attack, knife crime spike, the Russian poisoning, gender pay gap at the BBC, Commonwealth Games and other sport, and Prince Charles reunited with a fan who kissed him 40 years ago. Those are the headliners. Other notables on the front page are elephants loose on a Spanish motorway, Jay-Z's gay mother, more gender pay gap stuff, ladyboys from Thailand, northern teachers told to lose their regional accents, and a man who wrestled an escaped ram in Derbyshire. The Syrian gas attack is fair enough as a headline, as is the spike in knife crime that has resulted in the tragic deaths of dozens of mostly teenage victims. But this was today, as it was then. It was a much slower news day the day before, and still there was no mention of the Telford rape gangs. But there were endless sensational stories regarding the Russian poisoning case, even though nobody has yet died, so far at least. Oh, and the gender pay gap stuff is red hot stuff at the moment, considering the Me Too campaign. Quite where the Me Too campaign was when the Telford story was breaking, I don't know. Probably concentrating on their black outfits at the Oscars, I suppose. I mean, do underage teenage victims of gang rape get to be part of the Me Too campaign? Or is it just BBC women on £150,000 a year who are feeling a little underappreciated because their male counterparts have been on 20 grand a year more? Well, ladies, first things first, obviously. But the Telford case is ongoing, and it seems as if it might just be the tip of the iceberg. Although there have been tips of icebergs in Rotherham, Rochdale, Oxford, Bristol and Newcastle at the last count. I don't understand why they're not interested in this story. I mean, is it not sensational enough? But whichever way you look at it, they are quite plainly not interested. And they're not listening. But in a roundabout sort of way, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter because they, the BBC and the rest of the mainstream media, don't matter. And they know it. They are increasingly becoming an irrelevance. People, and the young in particular, are getting their views from elsewhere, fake or not. As you know, my dragon to slay, my unknown, is the surveillance state. But I've been having my doubts about whether I should really go up against it. Is it worth it? Will I make a difference? Can I make a difference? And when stories like Telford come up, it makes me wonder if I really am barking up the wrong tree. Am I? I still don't think so, but it's worth considering. The thing about the Telford rape gang story is that it happens to be the closest crocodile to the boat. It does seem as if it is the most urgent thing to address, since it is likely that it is continuing, perhaps not in Telford, but almost certainly elsewhere. But one of my criticisms of the case, or the non-handling of it to be more precise, is that one of the things that I hate the most, indiscriminate surveillance, could perhaps have prevented it. And this presents a dilemma for me. Would I accept a total surveillance society in return for a guarantee that vulnerable pubescent and underage girls would never be raped? Well, in the circumstances, I might be tempted to consider it. But I will be a fool to accept such a thing. and for several reasons. The first is a purely practical one, and is to do with the sheer incompetence of the police and other law enforcement agencies. If we are to believe that the police force is made up of well-meaning human beings who only have our best interests at heart, and we then ask how such a thing can be allowed to happen, questioning their competence, since we are assuming their motives to be pure, is the only option available. Over 1,000 girls raped repeatedly over a 40-year period in a relatively small provincial town. How can that have escaped their notice? So how can we assume that even if they did have unblinking surveillance infrastructure, would they even be able to stop it then? It sounds to me as if coppers in Telford, as elsewhere, couldn't spot a rapist if one fucked them up the arse. The second reason is that if we discount the ineffectual idiot scenario I just mentioned, there must be another reason why this was allowed to happen. If they did know what was going on, why didn't they stop it? The why is always the most interesting question. It may also be the most disturbing. When I was 18, I did actually apply to join the Metropolitan Police. I didn't go through with it, and it never got to the selection stage, so I've no idea whether I would have been accepted. I didn't go through with it for what might be a fairly cowardly reason, in that I didn't want all my friends to hate me. But the reason that I applied in the first place was the same reason that I imagine most people join up. I suppose I wanted to be a hero. The police are routinely portrayed as heroes in our society now, just as it was 30 years ago. And some police officers are definitely deserving of that accolade. Police Constable Mohammed Nadeem, yeah, really, is one such example, being a non-swimmer who dived into a freezing river and rescued a man from drowning. He is a hero, and every copper in the land gets a slice of reflected glory from his actions. But it does make you wonder about the motivations of the police force in Telford. Did they not aspire to be heroes? At what point does your enthusiasm to be viewed as a hero turn into something far less admirable? Of course, most people come to view their job as a grind after a while. It becomes something to get through. You do what is expected of you, and sometimes no more. You turn a blind eye to something at the end of the shift because that you know not to, is to extend that shift by 2, 3 or 4 hours, and probably those hours are something you may not get paid for. So I can understand and do not especially condemn that kind of neglect, and I guess we can call it that kind of low-level corruption, even if it did happen at the end of your shift. And for every policeman and woman in Telford, but what really baffles me is why you would ignore something so serious as the rape of a child, even if it did happen at the end of your shift. And for every policeman and woman in Telford to ignore it for 40 years. Why would you do that? You wouldn't, would you? Unless, perhaps, it was policy. But why would it be policy? I can't for the life of me fathom why it would be policy to ignore the industrial scale rape of children. Surely if you wanted to be a hero, might you not break ranks? Do they all value their police pensions more than the very real possibility of becoming heroic by speaking out about such things? I'm aware of the frankly unbelievable theory that children are being groomed by their tens of thousands as sacrificial rape meat for the Illuminati, the Bilderberg Group, MPs and lords and other elite groups. But keeping quiet about Muslims doing it, Who benefits from this culture of silence, other than the rapists themselves? How do the elite benefit? How does the Telford police force benefit? How does Shropshire County Council benefit? Unless the assumption that the police force, the social services and the council authorities are, on the whole, fallible but basically good and decent human beings is wrong. But just like the theories of what happened on September the 11th, 2001, it's a leap that I just can't take. But I am preparing myself to consider it in the absence of anything else. As I've said before, I believe in society. I really do. But that is a scary pit to peer into. And so if such a nightmare scenario is true, I don't wish to be under the surveillance of such a regime any more than I have to be. Because if there is any truth to that, one thing is for sure: the surveillance state is very definitely not there to protect me. And this is where the nonsense of the line trotted out by people who agree with more surveillance comes in. If you've nothing to hide, you've nothing to fear. That the state is benign. But the assumption that lies behind that statement is that the state is good and will look after you, that it is benign. I mean, why would you hide from the state if it was always good? But what if it wasn't good? What if it wasn't benign? What if it had some other agenda? What if, for instance, the government of the day had decided that it wasn't just the government of the day, but was indistinguishable from the state? And because it decided that it was indistinguishable from the state, it began to behave as if it was justified in stamping on any opposition by conflating opposition to the government of the day as the same as opposition to the state. In the defence of the realm, of course, which, as we all know, is the first duty of government. And then they'll call it treason. But has the state been good? Has it been benign? Has it looked after its citizens in Rotherham and Rochdale, in Oxford and Newcastle? Has it looked after completely innocent and vulnerable teenage girls in Telford? Has it? Were those fathers that attempted to prevent the rape of their daughters supported? Or were they arrested as troublemakers? They had nothing to hide, and yet they were made to fear arrest. Although I don't believe the more outlandish claims of mass child grooming for the elites, I have been forced into believing something I wish I didn't, and that is that the state is not there for us. It's there for them. So bearing that in mind, should I look upon my pathetic attempts to effect some change, however small, as the folly that many tell me it is, when even YouTube, that so-called bastion of free speech, flags my previous video as offensive and inappropriate, thereby altering the algorithms and cutting its legs off mid-stride so that it garners much less coverage than it otherwise would have? Should I just give up and go back to my obscure little life, get my head down and hope that I can learn to live in the open prison that bears no relation to the free country that I grew up in? Should I do that? No, I shouldn't do that. I shouldn't do that, partly because I would be breaking a promise to myself not to give up, and partly because I know that not opposing these things is essentially the same as supporting them. The absence of objection is the same as tacit approval, and tacit approval is approval. For evil to prevail, it is only necessary that good men do nothing. So those are two reasons, and they're both moral. But there is a third reason, and is a practical one. Before I started this, I imagined that anything I might do was unlikely to make any difference, but I decided to do it anyway. And lately I've been experiencing a very unusual feeling, and this feeling is not me at all. It's so not me that I had trouble in identifying it at first, but that feeling is something akin to optimism. Yeah, that's a weird one, especially for a miserable old git like me. Strangely, and against all of my previous history, I've begun to feel that we, as people who still love liberty and freedom of thought and association and conscience and movement, and above all freedom of speech, we could win this battle, this war. We could. We really could. And so in the end, it doesn't matter that they're not listening. There are powerful forces against us, to be sure. Very powerful. And they are not to be underestimated. They are hard. They're hard, but they're brittle. That's why they're using every trick in the book to try and silence those that want their freedom back. More surveillance, more laws, more force. But I reckon they're a bit desperate. And the thing about brittle things is, you've just got to hit them in the right place, and they will shatter. No matter how hard they try to smother free speech, it finds its way to the light. As Leonard Cohen puts it, there's a crack in everything. It's how the light gets in. So that's why I won't stop, and neither should you.